Okay, welcome everyone to the seventh R 3.0 open dialogue on bioregionalism. And we are particularly excited to start the 2026 season of this series out with David Bollier and Natasha Hulst from the Schumacher Center for a New Economy, talking about their brand new essay called Relationalized Finance for Generative Living Systems and Bioregions. This is an essay that just came out in December of 2025. So it's at this point just about a month old. And we hope that everyone on the line has had an opportunity to give it a read. But if not, Natasha and David are going to take us through this. So I'm just going to take care of a few sort of logistics to begin with, and then I'll hand it over to Natasha and David. And one thing I will say is I'm senior director with R 3.0, and most of you are accustomed to having Ralph Thurm, our managing director, on these calls as well. Ralph is having a routine medical procedure today, nothing to worry about, no big deals, but it just means that he won't be able to be with us, unfortunately. Um, so I will just go to the next slide. And this is, I'll just give a quick introduction to the agenda. We're going to start with the welcome. That's what we're doing right now, and give some engagement guidance, and then some context setting on this series and on this session in particular. And then we're going to spend a good chunk of time with David and Natasha presenting on relationalized finance. And then we'll open up into facilitated open dialogue. And I'll share a little bit about how we do that in a moment. And then we'll do a closing where I'll share some things that are coming up. So pretty straightforward agenda here. The image is just one that I pulled from the relationalized finance essay. So you'll hear more about that from David and Natasha. So just some engagement guidance. I ask everyone to stay on mute, please. It's often you'll hear background coming in, so please stay on mute. We welcome folks to keep your camera on, but we understand if you can't. During the session, please add your questions in the chat sidebar as they occur. So I'll be monitoring that and curating the questions to cover in the facilitated dialogue segment. We summarize and cluster questions for efficiency sometimes, and so we may ask you to voice them yourselves, in which case we ask you to respect everyone by keeping your questions succinct, on topic, no grandstanding, in other words, and respectful, so no ad hominems. We haven't had a problem with this in our open dialogue series, but just stating that at the outset. And then I will add a link in a bit to the a Google document for comments and resources. So we do that so that the sidebar is focused on questions, but people often have great resources. So that's a living document for all of our open dialogues. And I'll post that in the sidebar in just a little bit. I'm doing both two things at once here today, which is unusual. Usually I have capacity with Ralph here as well. And also just please add your name before your contributions if you wish to be identified. So that just makes it a little bit easier for attribution. And then finally, we record all of these open dialogue sessions for posting on our open dialogues landing page on our website. So that's just the guidelines. A quick bit of background here. The open dialogue series began in early 2024, just in response to popular demand for spaces to delve deeper into collective sense making. Literally, I posted something on LinkedIn. One of our community members said, hey, it'd be great to talk about that in more depth. And we said, sure. And that evolved into this ongoing series. We focused 2 sessions in 2024 on bioregionalism, and then in 2025, we've devoted the series entirely to bioregionalism. So here you can see the history. I won't go through all of these, but we've had eight sessions so far. This is the ninth, formally speaking, but we started numbering them in 2025. So this gives you a sense of the breadth of issues that we've been talking about. So generally speaking, we split these sessions sort of in about half, with the first half or so being presentation, and then the second half opening up into open dialogue. We may play around a little bit with that timing, given a slightly later start than usual. So I'll keep this brief and get right into introducing our speakers. So we're really excited to have David Bollier and Natasha Hulst. They both work with the Schumacher Center for a New Economics, which is in the same bioregion that I'm in right now. It's just west of me in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. So I'm mostly going to let them speak for themselves. So I'm not going to read this introduction or the bios, but what I will do is introduce by just a brief word or two about the relationalized finance essay. So I was really honored that David sent a review copy of Relationalized Finance to me before publishing it. And so I had an opportunity to preview the essay, and I was really struck by the strength of the essay. Not surprisingly, knowing the work of David and Natasha going back years, but particularly struck by how it integrates what David calls an ontological shift or an onto shift, or the necessity of actually shifting the worldview that we're coming from one of neoclassical economics or traditional corporatized finance into a whole new way of seeing the world, that's necessary for finance to function in a bioregional context. That's my sort of summarization or interpretation. David and Natasha will give you a much more expanded view of this. So I'll end at that and hand it over to Natasha and David. They will pull up their slides. But first, I just want to thank the both of you so much for joining us here at the R3.0 Open Dialogue series.
Thank you, Bill.
Well, thank you.
I'll just put the slides on.
Great. Thank you, David. Thank you, Natasha. I'm going to go on mute and be listening to you intently.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill.
Okay, can you see the slides?
We can. They're in the.
I'm going to put it on.
Yeah.
I'm going to do the view and then put it on the slideshow. Yeah. Okay, David.
Well, Natasha and I will be sharing this presentation, going back and forth. I'll just say a few remarks and pass it on to her. I mean, first of all, thank you, Bill and Ralph. I want to thank Natasha for being my great colleague on this project. And I want to thank all of you for showing up, because I consider this really ultimately a collaborative affair. There were a lot of things that I felt, coming from my background, were backgrounded and not foregrounded, that this essay with Natasha, and we were trying to synthesize and integrate in a new way. So it's more than a provocation, but less than a blueprint, meaning it's a conceptual frame that tries to draw a lot of on-the-ground things that are going on right now. But of course, there's a lot of fuzzy edges that have to be thought about collectively and invented. So that's where we're coming from on all this. Natasha, maybe you have any few introductory words before we get underway?
Yeah, I think also, I mean, David and I have been talking about this since we met, I think in 2019. And it's a topic that it's been really has really evolved in recent years. And I mean, one of the things that really drives me is also how do we, how do you support people working in bioregions, working on a local level? Because I think the funding and the financing and the work that is being done at the local level, also I know from experience, is so hard to fund, and also, but that's really where everything has to happen at the end, in the end of the day. So, but it's not. I think that's one of the main barriers also to really moving towards the change that we want. So, so I'm very happy that we finally were able to publish this essay together. And as I also I've mentioned before, is that I think it's definitely a threshold, a start, not necessarily an ending. And I hope from this discussion that we'll be able to work on it more, and that it will further evolve.
Maybe, Natasha, you could move the slide since it's on your slide
Yes,
share.
I'll do that. Yeah, is that working?
So I want to start, yes, and I will just say
Yeah,
next, and you can hit the button.
it's fine.
We'll go back for a second.
Yeah,
The A quick prelude, because we approach this from where the existing finance system generally is, without getting into the morass of deep and complex critique, because that has its limits, and we wanted to think more proactively. But let's just have a few slides to summarize what we regard as one of the major difficulties with finance today. Next. Finance and financialization uh, are a kind of power. And I think we see the symptoms of this all over. They are kind of drivers of a lot of social pathologies of our time. How asset ownership is so concentrated among the oligarchs, and how Wall Street and the investment class are generally setting public and political priorities while at the same time milking the state for our subsidies from taxpayers, as well as the social agenda. And a lot of this, of course, is worsening inequality as money flows from the people in the bottom 50% to the top. And of course, this is also, as the oligarchs have greater control, shrinking democratic space, culture, and this has its own self-reinforcing dynamics. Next. And we also see how financialization, meaning the use of finance in ways that are divorced from the productive real economy, is having all sorts of extraction going on. And we see this with a lot of private equity, just essentially taking ownership and then leveraging it for its financial gains, as opposed to something that is productive, competitive, innovative, socially beneficial. Next. And as someone who's studied the commons for many years, I've been keenly aware of how finance is a weapon for enclosing the commons, meaning acquiring ownership rights over a major asset, whether it's land or software or buildings or many other things that were once shared, and then asserting control over them and how they will be managed, how they will be market facing, how they will generate maximum revenues. All of this essentially eclipsing the previous history of commoning land, for example, under very different terms. Uh, and global capital is increasingly aligning itself with the state in enclosing a lot of shared wealth. And that's a very serious concern for me. So I, of course, think a lot about how it might be countered, doing through policy, legislation, litigation, regulation is increasingly a non-starter. Next slide. And I was struck when I read this quote by Francois Hollande, who ran for president in France. I'm going to tell you who my adversary is. My real adversary has no name, no face, no party. He will never run for office and will never be elected, and still he will rule. This adversary is the world of finance. And, it just shows the dilemma that a progressive vision has when it, on so many edges, it's cornered in by the imperatives of conventional finance. Next. And I've taken some heart with the development of regenerative finance as a class of trying to deal with this. It represents a serious shift, I think, in aspiration and certain terms of discussion, and indeed many innovative experimental projects. At the same time, I've seen a lot of projects that are not so ambitious, not so transformational in aspiration. And in some ways, is it pouring the old wine into new wineskins? Is it transformational in operational ways? This is a concern for me, especially when we've seen the long history of uh, new and improved green strategies co-opted. Next slide. And, it struck me that there have been so many eco-finance or eco-improvement strategies over the past 50 years, which in truth have not made a huge dent. It seems like they have a half-life of credibility, and then you have to invent a new one. Uh, there are others we could add to this list. The next slide. And I saw a report just a few months ago, the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance and Astara, which noted a shocking fact to me that there's $7 trillion or more in annual finance subsidizing all sorts of harm, but the actual amount of funds actually earmarked for protection or restoration of ecosystems, very minimal by comparison, 200 billion. And this is kind of this is very dismaying considering the long history of environmental concern that the money is not necessarily following. And which is not to say that that 200 billion is not doing good things. It probably is doing a lot of good things in absolute terms, but relative to the problem, we have a lot to do. Next slide.
Oh, it's not moving along. Oh, there we go.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, no, go back to you did
Oh,
two
yeah, yeah,
slides
yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
this gets us to a question, I think. No, the next slide. This gets us to a question of whether we should be focusing.
No, it was the previous one, I think.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's it. I want the slide.
Yeah.
Whether we should mobilize more financing, which of course has tends to have value, or whether we should change finance itself. And I see the existing finance system based on certain premises, such as individualism, property rights, extraction, separations of humans from nature, and economic growth, which are really built-in structural premises of conventional capitalist finance. And I see a need in the commons and many, many adjacent companion movements of moving into uh, symbiotic finance for symbiotic relational living systems. So that's really the focus that we want to focus on in this talk. The next slide. And the challenge that I've been grappling with for a while is, can we imagine new forms of finance that philosophically and operationally support ecological, social, and local needs on their own terms, not just as things conscripted into the capitalist growth progress narrative. Next slide. So a quick preview of what we want to cover, and we're going to try to do this pretty briskly. Why bioregional frame for finance? Why commoning? Reframing value. We need to think about value in a different theoretical sense. And what we'll introduce is living systems as generative. A brief section on socio-ecological markets. How can we imagine bioregional markets that don't just bleed into the global circuits of capitalism? And relationalized finance as one, I might add, among other approaches for dealing with this, because I don't regard relationalized finance as a panacea. All sorts of other systems will continue, but I do regard it as setting certain new conceptual frames and benchmarks. Next slide. And just to be clear, we're not going to be discussing these things, how conventional finance could be reformed, how public finance could play an important role, how fiscal and monetary policy might play into certain environmental aspirations, and regenerative finance in its many diverse forms. We won't be discussing about these. They are certainly relevant, but they'll not be the focus of our talk. Next. So Natasha will start briefly talking about why bioregional frame.
Yeah, so why I think it's really important that, and we think it's very important that we focused it on bioregional and on bioregioning or bioregional frame, is because, of course, it's something that's been really surging in recent years, I would say, and we can see it as a way in which to frame both the social and the ecological regeneration that has to happen. So bioregions, they really reorganize life around the watershed, soils, food systems and cultures rather than just the political borders. And we think that within these ecological rather than political boundaries, we have a place-based way of looking at commons, and we also feel very much strongly that when financing or funding bioregional, the bioregional activities within a bioregion, I think it's very important that we have to move away from more standard ways of financing. So that's why we really thought it was very important to maybe place certain benchmarks around the way in which bioregioning should be funded from a perspective of commons. And the general goal within this for bioregioning or the bioregional frame is very much because it connects skills, it links local action to systemic regional change, and builds resilience, both ecological and societal. Working for the Schumacher Center for New Economics, these is very much has been what Susan Witt and others have been working on for the past 40 years. So we're very happy with this, with the bioregional frame, to show, to actually bring a frame for a lot of the different ways, commoning, decentralization, local action, but also I think one of the things that's been really missing very much from sustainability is looking at it also the cultural and the importance of creating trust and weaving belonging locally as well via collaboration. And of course that's also very much what the Commons is about. So there's a very clear link between bioregioning and commoning. So some key strategies with that for bioregional, the key strategies for relationalized finance within bioregionalism or bioregioning is to establish bodies of shared inalienable ecological wealth and create these cooperatively managed infrastructures. I think a lot of it is very much about creating new infrastructures that, and we'll get into that in more detail later. Very much, it's also very much about peer governance, of course that as being central to commoning and commons. Different forms of governance and also different forms of ownership and federated cooperation, also as a way of decentralizing power and ownership. And yeah, as we said before, I think the bioregional frame really helps with having a social ecological viewpoint from a place-based perspective, and to have commerce at the bioregional scale. Um, so all of this needs different infrastructure, as we mentioned. It needs different ways of state law, but it also needs a different way of a different administration, and it also needs finance to facilitate all of the above to develop. So, David, over to you.
Well, we see that commoning has a key role in trying to fulfill bioregioning because it brings some of the attributes that Natasha just mentioned. I want to have a brief flyby of the commons about which much could be said, but let's just get into this, Natasha. Just next slide, and I'll try to give a quick review of why we think the commons has an important role here. First of all, we have to skate past Garrett Hardin's famous Tragedy of the Commons essay, which has many flawed premises. I don't want to dwell on it, but there's embedded biases or assumptions. I love how Lewis Hyde, a scholar of the Commons, described it as the tragedy of unmanaged, laissez-faire common pool resources with easy access for non-communicating, self-interested individuals. He presumed a type of humanity that, frankly, is Homo economicus, the lone individual of standard economics. He was actually more describing the tragedy of the market, in which there's no rules, no community, at least laissez-faire, very few rules, no community, uneven enforcement, and all the rest, resulting in an overuse. Overuse of resources does occur, but he was not describing a commons where there is a community, there are rules, there are punishment for transgressors, and so forth. Next slide. And of course, Eleanor Ostrom, the Indiana University scholar of the Commons, was the key figure in helping reclaim and restore the Commons, showing through empirical field work in scores of different locations around the world that commoning is an entirely feasible, sustainable strategy. And she helped identify certain design principles for successful commons. Won the Nobel Prize in 2009 for this work. I stand on the shoulder of this giant in my own work in the commons because she cleared so much space in a economic discipline that was quite hostile to the idea of cooperation being consequential and meaningful. Next slide. But it's important to stress that a commons is not a resource, or at least not a resource alone. I think it's more primarily a self-organized social system, which of course involves resources. I put resource in, it's a community plus a resource and social norms and practices. I put resource in quotes here because once you're a commoner, you have a certain different relationship with the resource such that you care about it, you want to protect it. Your culture and your cultural identity may revolve around it. Silke, my former colleague, we described it as care wealth to describe this type of different relationship. And that's an element that a lot of standard economists and politicians don't appreciate about the commons, this affective, cultural identity, belonging, meaning, values dimension that is part of the commons as well. Next slide. And it's important to see that the commons verse, it already exists. It's around the world. It's the heritage of humankind over millennia. It's just not culturally legible in advanced capitalist societies that have a whole different framework and worldview for seeing the world. There's an estimated 2 billion people who are subsistence commoners. Some of them are in poverty by conventional modern definitions. Others simply don't have limited dealings with the marketplace. In any case, it's a flourishing form of stewardship of land, forests, fisheries, water, and many other things. And this was the primary focus of Ostrom and the Ostrom scholars for the past 40 years. Next slide. But there are many contemporary uh, commons in all sorts of different realms. They're not confined to global south or natural resource arenas. And my book, Think Like a Commoner, which just came out in the second edition, and my book, the Commoner's Catalog for Changemaking, oops, both of which are trying to sort of sketch this social and economic landscape out to show the immense diversity of successful functioning commons out there, which just are not really suitably recognized. Next slide. And there's no master inventory, and I prefer not to classify them by their resources alone because they pop up in unusual ways. There's a theater commons, there's this humanitarian open street map team that does maps for emergencies. There's the potato park that is a steward of the largest biodiversity of potatoes in the world in Latin America, Peru. Uh, there's a microscope. Scientists have this high definition scientific microscope that they've done on collaborative open source principles. So the point is they can happen anywhere, and they do. Next slide. So briefly, I want to get into a section here about rethinking value, because we're all familiar from standard economics with that value happens when people truck and barter in the marketplace and exchange, and that's how wealth and value are created. Uh, there's no question that that does create value and wealth, but it also leaves a lot on the side as if it's not propertized or monetized, it's not seen as valuable. So we think this is an important thing to discuss in the context of bioregionalism and certainly about commoning, because often,
for people.
often that value is not propertized or monetized. Next slide. There's some audio coming in there. And here's the theory of value of how it occurs in the commons. Relationality is what animates ecosystems and commons. But generally, if we can't see and explain that rationality and how it interacts, how do we protect the value that's generated? That's kind of the dilemma. Economists refer to this as externalities, and many traditions from ecological economics to feminist economics and others have tried to find ways to better represent those quote externalities that are not recognized by standard market behavior in economics. Next slide. This all, I think, is part and parcel of the long history of cooperation and mutualism as deep principles of natural systems. Lynn Margulis, the famous biologist, helped reveal that symbiosis was a critical factor in evolutionary development. And others, such as Peter Kropotkin, one of the early scientists who studied natural systems and living systems, saw how this symbiosis, this cooperation, this mutual aid lies at the heart of the interconnectedness of nature and how it evolves and generates things. Next slide. And in recent years, there's been this huge surge of literature about how living organisms are so deeply relational and entangled. Mycelia, of course, has become a cultural meme, but there's all these other books that many of you have probably encountered that explore the different facets of the entanglement of nature and how it produces this enormous amount of wealth, much of which, until it's propertized and sold, is not really considered as valuable. Indeed, the commons historically have been referred to as wastelands because they were leftover places that somebody either hadn't seized through political power, like kings and the landed gentry, or it hadn't been traded in the market. Next slide. And what I find fascinating is that there's a whole religious and spiritual tradition that is in sync with this. Martin Luther King, we're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. Or Thomas Berry, the cultural historian, the universe is the communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. Again, pointing to this ontological frame shift that I think lies at the heart of this discussion. Whoops, next slide, Natasha.
Yeah.
And I think this is why we've come to realize or believe that living systems are inherently generative. And these are just, some of the examples one could cite, uh, that it's all this entanglement, much of it far beyond property law or markets to understand, uh, that has to be honored on its own terms. Next slide. And as I suggested, capitalist economics doesn't really like to see this value or has trouble because they see value in such abstracted, individualized, and monetized ways where, value is market price, market exchange is seen as superior to use value. And of course, all of this is supposed to be uh, contributing to progress, which is defined as more consumption and capital accumulation. Next slide. And so we're talking here about a whole vast realm of value that has been mostly ignored by standard economics, except when it's been forced to. And then it tries to jerry-rig proxy structures for representing that value. It's hard to see the value if it's informal and intangible, if it's not recognized as property or money, if it's entangled in flows, social or ecological flows. And, obviously it tends to exist outside of markets and human society. It's not easily quantified. So this is, I think, part of our challenge in thinking about bioregionaling and many other ecological challenges is how this form of value can have standing at the, let's call it the epistemological level or the ontological level. That's something we've struggled to understand. And how do you protect dynamic living value from capitalist enclosures? Next slide. So I've come through my studies of the commons to realize that commoning of living systems is an effective way to do that. But the relationships that commoning entails requires a shift out of the framework that you'll learn in Economics 101. So it's less about the individual and the whole constellation of categories that economics will teach you. And it's about these things like peer governance. There's self-enforced limits on use. There's a concern for collective fairness. And custom and tradition are a way of stabilizing this system and giving it continuity. People have responsibilities and entitlements as part of belonging to a common. Participation tends to be inclusive. It's about meeting basic needs and not endless, relentless wants. It's about stewardship, and it's about shared assets that are not for sale. They're kind of, it's important that it's not just a market relationship as the centerpiece of what's going on. Next slide. In the book that I did with Silke Helfrich, we tried to identify patterns of commoning that are recurrent that successful commons tend to have, not just in a third person social science observational sense, but in a participatory first person subjective sense. I won't obviously have time to go through things like that, but it's like encourage gentle reciprocity, share knowledge generously, keep commerce and commoning distinct, and so on. So we tried to give some clarification and definition for how commons work at the interpersonal social level. Next slide. And then in our essay that we wrote about, I found this fantastic elaboration for how and why uh, nature and commons are so generative. And the permaculture expert Jolene Blaze wrote an essay many years ago about catchment and how catchment is a way that wealth, ecological wealth, is naturally, almost mysteriously generated by catchment areas where soil and seeds and water and nutrients and different species come together in a mutually reinforcing network or entanglement for creating stuff. And what's beautiful about it is how nature, this is kind of self-maintaining. If you want to regard it as natural capital, it depreciates very slowly because of that. And people can use simple technologies and processes to participate in it. And it resists monopolization and therefore it's generally accessible and provides long-term security against outside enclosures. So we found this a very compelling idea of a type of how, at a systemic level, value is created that needs to be stewarded and protected, especially from capitalist extraction. Next slide. And I would just close this little section by saying a lot of this reflects a larger generic shift we've seen in a relational ontology in philosophy and science, where the shift from, in Darwinian is a Darwinian evolution from the focus on the individual to now group selection, not just individual natural selection. And I think the relationality is manifesting in so many ways that I situate a lot of this discussion in this broader intellectual, cultural shift that I see going on. Next. So briefly now, this is only a few slides and then Natasha will resume. We want to talk about, okay, how do we focus commerce on culture and bioregions when global finance and markets are really mostly uncommitted to place? They operate on global circuits of wealth maximization, market maximization. So how does one begin to have a bioregional commerce that doesn't simply drift off into the global spaces or be captured by global players who really don't care about intensifying place-committed market activity? Next slide. Our idea is not to sort of erect mandates that prevent or exclude in any way. They'd be resisted. I think that in these early stages and to help foster a transition, we need to pursue strategies that intensify intra-regional commerce and interdependence. And in the process of doing that, build place-based identity, value, and meaning. So this is kind of a, quote, voluntary effort, but I think there are ways that one can conceptualize how it's done to start to knit together bioregional relationships and ecological relationships at the same time. Next. So it's about intensifying this place-committed commerce through some of these, Natasha mentioned some of these earlier, building shared infrastructures that can help facilitate regional commerce, organize peer-governed webs of interdependent businesses. There are some fascinating projects going on right now, especially in agriculture and open source agricultural equipment, trying to develop a shared ecosystem of interdependent businesses that is governed almost like a shadow government, but it's all regionally oriented and place committed. Obviously, there's a role for government, local, county, and national, or in state, probably less so with government, given the national government, given where that is these days. But by local procurement can be helpful in facilitating this. So in our essay, we, I think, name 18 or so different categories or strategies that people could explore to try to facilitate this intensified regional commerce. Another one was decommodifying land, energy, and knowledge through things like community land trusts and CSA farms, certain knowledge and data sharing, especially in agriculture, could be very helpful if it's not proprietary, but kind of an open source innovation scheme. Import replacement strategies, identifying what you can do regionally and substitute that for that, which something that might be coming from around the world, uh, and of course, with all of its carbon transport cost. And then cosmo-local production, I think, is a very promising, fascinating approach where you have global design and knowledge sharing, open source style for equipment, things you build, but you build the physical stuff locally. There's a flourishing cosmo-local sector that ranges from furniture to motor vehicles to agricultural equipment to housing and many other things. Still very rudimentary. Its financing needs to be developed more, but it's a fascinating way how you can have sophisticated construction with global talent, but it manifests and is done locally without the usual proprietary or patenting restrictions. Next slide. Um, a lot of this comes down to building identity and culture as well. It's not just an economic discussion. Uh, some of you may be familiar with the community wealth project that the Democracy Collaborative has pioneered. I think there's ways that that can be developed further to develop more stable, self-reliant regional economies. Complementary currencies such as the Schumacher Center's Berkshire's are a model that can be explored, but there's also others like mutual credit and time banking. There's a number of initiatives underway to have local and regional bio-based building materials and to make those more accessible and standard used in standard ways. Geographical indicators, which is a kind of trademark-like indicator that is used, Champagne, for example, or Parma cheese, identified with a region. I think we need to explore how those kinds of branding might be used. And then there's a lot of bioregional festivals that have occurred and some that are planned, such as in the Netherlands next year, which are ways to foster a sense of this is where I belong. This is the land that means something to me. I want to celebrate that. So these are just some of the strategies we see for building a bioregional focus. Obviously, there's a lot to be thought about, figured out, and developed for this to expand. Next. But I will just show a few images here that suggest the cultural people engaging with the culture of their bioregion. The Pacific Northwest has the Salmon Nation approach, and we saw Cascadia earlier, which is also quite developed. I love how in Bristol, England, they created a map of their parish, and on the indigenous people and see the Great Sandy Desert through these kinds of works of art. I think art and culture has a lot to say in this whole conversation, and I will show the next slide too, which is another example. um, the Great Lakes Commons developed this currency of care. It has, of course, no official value, but it's a way of trying to stimulate the sense of identity of a shared commitment to a region. So I found that interesting. Natasha, you pick up from here.
Yes, and great to see that everybody's still with us. And we're just going to now go into relationalized finance, and also David, yeah, chime in if there's anything that I forget. So about 6 months ago, I also started working for the Bioregional Weaving Labs based in the Netherlands, but we focus on Europe, and there's 8 different bioregional weaving labs within Europe, but there's also within the Netherlands what we call the Delta Bioregion, the living Delta Bioregion. There's also 8 different landscapes that we work with. And what we've noticed is, and what we're trying to do there is also to create a bioregional financing facility inspired very much by Samantha Power and Leon Seufield's book that came out, I think it was last year. And we're also working with Leon on that. So we're really trying to put this into practice as well. And I think, it seems to be happening everywhere at once. There's very much local funds being set up, but also, for example, Joe Brewer is doing that with his Bioregions. So we can see that it's not just an idea. It's something that's really, I've noticed that it's happening on a local level, on a regional level, in many different countries at the same time. So that's very hopeful. And I think what we've tried to do is to give some extra frame for how to do it. So not just what to fund, but how to fund. Because I think that's been not necessarily lacking, but it's something that definitely still needs a lot of thought and development, and it's great to be able to do that with David, and also at the same time to see it, to be able to try and put it into practice through what my work at the moment is, Bioregional Portfolio Weaver within the Delta region, and very much moving from what does a region need, socially, culturally, economically, and not having money or capital as the protagonist within this. So not looking at what does money want to fund, but very much what does a region need. And I think that's also what relationalized finance is. It's a non-capitalist, commons-friendly alternative, and very much needed. Here you can see how a community comes together to create something. The example of the US barn raising, and it's also very much so. One of the things that makes it the relationality of the way of doing this is that it is not transactional or profit driven. It's very much about creating things together locally. And we always put this slide in. And I think it's very apt. It's an installation from Thomas Lomé at the University of Ghent, and because a lot of people, when we talk about climate or any of the emergencies that we face at the moment, people say, well, we don't have time. It's all very urgent. Everything, of course, is urgent, but at the same time, we're very much convinced that it needs to be happening place committed and decentralized. So the next big thing will be a lot of small things. And that also is about funding. So I think that also counts for funding. Pooling funds by commoners and supporters can be done, and is very important to do as well, but can also be done in ways that might not necessarily be seen as substantial, but what we are seeing is that crowdfunding and crowd equity and also grassroots fundraising can establish a substantial amount of funding. We've seen that also in the Netherlands recently. We have the highest land prices in the world, but still through crowdfunding, people have been able and are able to buy their land and place it into commons. This is just one example that I go into a little bit more, but it also pooling funds and also blending funds can also de-risk certain types of capital and also have less necessity for higher returns, so also therefore philanthropy can also have an important gifting. Oh, we'll go into that in a minute, actually. That will be a different way of viewing this, and I think it's also very much about the cultural shift that we need to have around how do we fund things. So, as David went into living systems are generative, and this is the non-market value proposition we have, and there's many examples of that already out there, except they're often seen as non-consequential or maybe not not efficient enough. And maybe, David, you want to add something to this slide?
No, I just wanted to say that I think what's important is to note that we're self-consciously embracing and helping support a different form of value, because finding ways to do that within the capitalist frame of finance is so difficult because it has to be monetized and given a proxy market value, and instead of respecting the analog nature of the value creation in the first place. I think that's sort of the point.
Yes. So, David, so maybe you could give a little bit of background about the transvestment, about the history of transvestment.
This slide sort of suggests that there's two value paradigms, and how can we get them to play nicely together and have not the conventional sense of value colonize and extract from the other. I was inspired originally by the German hacker Dmitry Kleiner developed the idea of transvestment, in which open source communities would create value in ways that conventional software companies, as hierarchical businesses, could not. And he saw the transvestment occurring, that people would invest in open source communities precisely to honor that alternative value. I was inspired by that concept of transvesting value from one arena of value creation, the capitalist market on a global scale, and we know how that functions, to this neglected area where value has a different character. And I think it's important to accent that value shift, or the different ways in which value is created. So that's why we talk about transvestment, because one is self-consciously investing in a different value proposition.
Yeah, and in order to do that, I think we discussed and we talked about this a lot, is that you do need to have a buffer or intermediary, and we see that as a semi-permeable membrane in which the capital can flow towards the generative system, living systems, but it also at the same time neutralizes the capital, because we think this is very important, also to not have the influence, but also not to have the way in which, of course, capital can be very can direct in a negative way a lot of the things that are happening on the ground, and also is, of course, extractive in that way. The other slide that we have here, and maybe, am I forgetting something here, David?
No, I think you got it all.
Yeah. So this is why transvestment is necessary. I think the problem with impact investing, green finance, regenerative finance is still that a lot of the finance still demands returns that are not realistic, imposes the market logic, and also treats nature as an asset. So even the well-intentioned capital ends up flowing along the same warm grooves, and we've seen that a lot of impact investing, a lot of the social enterprises, or a lot of the initiatives that have started up with a lot of excitement also in the Netherlands recently, is a lot of them around food systems or agriculture, or and a lot of exposure and a lot of funding and subsidies flow towards them, but then still it's very hard for them to survive within the existing capitalist economy that we live in. So we think that it's very important to kind of when we talk about, maybe people often talk about a level playing field, but I think this is actually even the level playing fields we create are not level. So in order to do that, you do need to neutralize the extractive expectations and also change what money is allowed to do, and the expectations on that. So the way in which finance is happening, and we believe that that can be done mainly through the way in which it's governed and the way in which capital is neutralized in that way. So we need to protect the commons from, and therefore also protecting commons from enclosure. Anything to add?
No.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've worked on a lot in the last 6 years is decommodifying land, or land transvestment. And one of the main examples of that, of course, is very well known in the US, and where it originated in the 1960s already, to create land access for marginalized black farmers. The way in which a community land trust is actually one of the best examples of commons, and also one of the best ways of examples of transvestment. Of course, there is a very broad range of different types of community land trusts, and people will know it mainly for affordable housing. But it's also in the Netherlands and in Europe, also with Ter Lien and other organizations that have been experimenting with this, and also in the Netherlands in recent years. One of the organizations that I co-founded with a number of people is called Grond van Bestaan, but there's also Lenteland, and also Aardbeer with and all of them have different ways of doing it, but most of them have the same intention, that they've seen that land prices continue to rise, and therefore it makes actually any type of food transition or affordable housing or climate action makes it incredibly difficult. And as we are seeing now is that even we're not increasing the amount of organic farming or regenerative farming, with a large scale generational turnover all over the world, we're even going backwards, and there's more and more land being bought and put into the hands of less and less people. So what the idea, of course, of this is that with transvestment you need to, of course, amass quite a lot of money to do that, because land is very expensive. It depends where you are, but especially in the Netherlands it's very expensive. But once you have taken it out of the market and you've put it into a community land trust or a different form of commons, it will be removed permanently if your governance structure is organized well. So that makes the outcomes really for a long term, and it creates affordable access for farmers or housing. Long term, you can invest long-term soil and ecosystem care, and therefore also take away the incentive for extraction and take away the financial value, and you will be able to have the social and ecological value will therefore be able to flourish. So this, I think, is the best example that we have for transvestment, but it's also in a lot of other fields. We have relationalized finance. Community supported agriculture is a good example, mutual credit systems, mutual aid, pay it forward, bioregional regeneration funds still being developed, crowdfunding and crowd equity, and peer-funded cooperatives are all examples of relationalized finance, and in some ways also transvestment. So why relationalized finance? I hope it's become a little bit more clear, and we'll be moving to the discussion soon. So very much to have a relative autonomy also to create this new infrastructure for bioregional commerce and commoning, and also to formally recognize the reality of living systems as generative. So, and as David also just said, it's actually a distinct class of non-capitalist forms of finance. So, and in the end, it's about what is the way in which we fund, and not just what we fund. So we leave you with this. So can we imagine a credible and compelling new futures to mobilize our energies now? So don't wait until the right political party is in power, or wait for policy change, or how can we imagine this already? And how can we mobilize energies now? And I think, as I said, it's very much a threshold, this first essay, and we hope to publish in a few months. We hope to publish a new version with a lot more examples, and also to be able to take in a lot of your comments and feedback that we've received on this. So thank you for staying till the end, and thanks David as well.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Thank you, David. Really, so much grist for the mill, I guess, is one metaphor that we could use. And you probably weren't able to track the sidebar, but there is really a robust set of questions and conversation in the sidebar. Probably going to overstretch our ability to address it all in the short time that we've got. So I'll be brief in my comments, but maybe folks may be able to stay on a little bit extra. Natasha and David, do you have any flexibility? Or no? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you do? Okay, great. Yeah. So we'll sort of play it by ear, but I'll jump right into some of the questions. And a few of the early questions were really about some examples. And I do think that by the end, you had given a few examples. So maybe in your responses, generally speaking, the more that you can cite specific examples would be helpful. So we'll sort of continue to track that. So Carrie, Norton, and Ka, thank you for those questions for examples, and also Nicola. So we had a question about, so resources in bioregion stay in a bioregion, input and output stays local first. And you did address that briefly in your slide on the import replacement, but I wonder if that's something that you might want to address a little bit more, especially given the long history of the Schumacher Center's thinking on import replacement.
I think it comes down to trying to, it's not an absolute thing that you're going to pull up the drawbridges and make a totally self-sustainable bioregion, but I do think you can intensify the self-reliance as a relative issue. And the strategies that we mentioned in our essay are precisely about intensifying that bioregionally committed, economically and culturally, types of commerce and types of engagement that are frankly non-market through commoning. So, how do relations with the outside world then function? I think it'll be a long time before policy or law decides to get involved, given the state of the culture. I think we need to start to demonstrate both the economic feasibility as well as the social cultural appeal of bioregional economies, the way people like Cascadia have been trying to do by developing this sense of identity and commitment to place. I think that's my general framing of that. Natasha, you might have anything to add.
Well, I would also add that in bioregions, that's why they don't have, of course, that's why there's always questions about boundaries, because they have different boundaries depending on what different type of thing you're talking about. If you're talking about energy, it would have a different catchment, or fiber or building materials would have different a different, yeah, geographical area. And even things like coffee, of course, and things like that. We're not saying that nothing would be able to be produced outside of the bioregion, but very much looking at the appropriate scale in which things can be produced, and yeah, so that depends on what you're looking at.
Great. Thank you, Natasha and David. And folks looking for more information on import replacement can check out the Schumacher Center website. In particular, Jane Jacobs wrote an essay that she delivered as the 1983, I believe, Schumacher Lecture. So you can track that, and maybe we'll be able to find that in the in our notes. There was a really interesting sort of mini exchange in the sidebar that was started by TMA Hennis. Apologies for the mispronunciation if so, but they said, are digital industries by definition without boundaries, political or biological? So these are excluded from a bioregional perspective. So this sort of also brings up the question of bioregional boundaries from a slightly different perspective. Natasha, David, thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the Cosmo local production addresses that somewhat, that the benefits of networked collaboration on global scales can benefit a local region if we start to develop that mode of production based on design, knowledge, and online collaboration. But the point is well taken. Obviously, the internet is not confined by nation state territorial boundaries. Um, but historically, it's been more a force for colonizing a space or extracting from it than necessarily intensifying and building it. So,
Yeah, I would like to add also that the Netherlands has a massive amount of large-scale data centers. Um, if I remember driving towards the north of the island, Texel, towards the north of the Netherlands for the Dutch people, and my husband saying, "Well, look, there's the cloud," and it's just miles and miles of data centers. So in that way, if you look at it from an energy perspective, and also I think a lot of us know that how much energy that uses. So yes, it is bioregional at the same time. So it is somewhere all those TikTok films are being stored. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. The next sort of question that came up, we're probably not going to get to all of them, so I'm being a little bit selective here, in particular things that weren't covered as much in the presentation. So Stefan Dilschneider would ask for a clarification on the rationale for strategic exclusion of public finance instruments and fiscal and monetary policy from the analysis. And they said a little bit more, but that might be enough for you to start answering.
I'm not averse to that. I would love for public finance to play a deeper role for the purposes of focus in this essay and not writing 5 books for each of the sections. We had to limit ourselves, and also that has its own complications that would deserve, accurate, solid treatment. It would require another at least 6 months of my time to research. So, I mean, I think that it's a point well taken.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, of course, that we didn't mention, but we actually did. We did a project for the City of Amsterdam on their Commons program. That they have a program. I'm a program leader who is called Nathalie van Loon, and they were very much looking into how could we support urban commons within the City of Amsterdam, and how do we fund urban commons in a way in which we don't, in a different way as a city. So I think a lot of local and regional government public funding has a really important role to play, because of course the state has funded business very much in the last always because of the idea of innovation as a driver of GDP. But maybe now they do. There's also a realization around the role in which public commons partnerships can play within cities and regions. We hope also that, of course, in transvestment, public funding can have an important role in that.
I would just add that there is a burgeoning literature on so-called commons public partnerships and how municipalities and commons and community projects can collaborate. And that's worth exploring.
Yeah, and also looking at the way in which re-grantor funds can be placed in being more neutral, even though they're democratically and peer governed. For example, like a BFF, a Bioregional Financing Facility, placing it outside of short-term political, what do you call it? Political sphere. To have more long-term goals with funds that are peer governed locally.
Great, thanks, Natasha and David. I'm gonna jump the queue a little bit here to pose a question from Michael Haupt, because Michael had given some pushback on LinkedIn to the idea of relationalized finance, and he sort of encapsulates that here, and he has to jump off on the hour, so that's why I'm jumping it ahead a little bit. Michael, do you want to just go off mute and very briefly voice your question, or should I just read it from? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much, David and Natasha, for this work. It's important, and I still have this tension which regards systemic barriers within financing. I've been in this space for a long time. We've tried community land trusts, we've tried philanthropy, we've tried ESG investments, and always you come across a realization that the financial system itself is the issue. And so my question to the wider bioregional community is, when is the time right for us to include issuing our own currencies? I know you covered some of this in the paper, but that to me feels like the most important thing, to recognize that if we remain attached to the monetary system, we're actually never going to solve the issues that we have. I don't know that there's a simple answer, but I do want to table the conversation. Again, thank you for the work that you do. It's brilliant.
I mean, I think that's a very compelling case. It's just like we have 24 compelling things we need to do. I mean, I would love to see an alternative currency get involved, but I can also imagine the legal, technical, and political complexities of moving it forward. So I'm ready to support that idea, but it's a big project. Natasha, anything to add?
Well, I'm just wondering why, I would really like to, I mean, I'm sure a lot has been written about it, but why so many local and regional currencies have failed. And maybe it's because we need to have this cultural shift that we haven't had so far. So maybe the time just wasn't right for them at that point. But of course, it is an important part, an important way of doing it. And I think the Berkshires is one of the longest running community currencies.
I would just add, I would add a lesson that I learned from Will Ruddock, the currency designer in Africa, that unless there's the social collaboration, cooperation, and culture to begin with, currencies do have a tendency to become just another transactional medium. And that can erode the social cooperation and solidarity that is needed. So I think care needs to be created that the alternative currency does fulfill its place-based role and not simply become, another medium the way, well, Bitcoin never quite made it there. But in other words, just another market or even capitalist extractive medium. But I don't want to end on that negative note, Michael, because I think your point is very important. And I would love to see greater activity on that front.
Well, it's important, I think, that you named the Berkshires, given that those are really, have their history connected with the Schumacher Center. So we do have, an example of that. But I do think that, somebody brought up tokenization in the sidebar, that, some cryptocurrency or crypto mechanisms do enable the integration of governance into the system. So that's at least a step towards what you're talking about. A lot of discussion is really around sort of what distinguishes relationalized finance from other ideas in this realm. And so I did want to just point to Steve Melville listed three things that he think are distinct about relationalized finance. So folks might want to look at that in the sidebar. If there's time, I'll ask Steve to voice that maybe after the turn of the hour. But for those who can stay on, and David and Natasha said that they can, it would be great to take a few more of the actual questions here. One of them was from Marcus Petz, who asked, how do we get pension wealth to convert from international capitalism towards localized bioregional wealth? And I'll just note before handing it over to you, David and Natasha, that if Steve Rocco is still online, and I see Matt Orsag is also online. They just published a paper on a degrowth perspective on pension funds, so we might hear from them. But David and Natasha, over to you for the pension. How do pensions intersect with bioregionalism and relationalized finance?
I defer to that report, which I saw the other day, and I'm very much eager to read it because I think it's a huge issue and it's a difficult one. So I almost would prefer to pass the mic to somebody who can speak more knowledgeably than me.
Yeah, I would only add that this is something that in the Netherlands we've talked about a long time, but not being able to, and a lot of people have been already for many years been trying to move pension funds towards, for example, regenerative agriculture or organic agriculture, and I don't see much moving. But I'd love to hear examples of pension funds that are actually doing other things than that they've been doing for most of the time. So I do think it's an ideal combination, but I'd love to hear more about that as well.
Great. I see Matt. Yeah, Matt. Great.
Go ahead, David.
No, I was just going to pass it. I just saw that you had gone off mute and on video, so you and Steve maybe could weigh in on this.
No, go ahead, David, if you were going to say something.
Well, I just wanted to add one quick point that Michael Schumann, the American local finance expert, has been thinking a lot about these types of issues as well. So I just wanted to reference his name as a potential expert on precisely this topic. But otherwise, let's go on. Matt, go ahead.
Well, just very briefly, thanks, Bill, for pointing this out. I invite people to read the paper. David and Natasha, we'd love to talk to you further outside this. Love to work with you. I would say, unfortunately, we don't have all the answers in our paper. It's a lot of, these are the kind of things we see happening in the future that need to happen. Pensions, it's a cultural change for pensions, just as a lot of what we're talking about here is a cultural change. The discussion just about, currencies and how to change what finance does is a cultural issue, is a cultural change. And law and policy will follow culture. They don't lead it. And so these kind of discussions lead to those kind of things. And so what we see our paper as is kind of the first steps to alerting pensions to these problems, telling them we want to have these conversations, we want to move these things forward. Pension funds investing in the commons however they can. That's a concept that I think many pension fund people have never even thought of. And so we're trying to push that ball up that hill, so to speak. So we invite people to read the paper and further this dialogue with us as you can.
Great. And Matt and Steve, if you could maybe throw a link to the paper again. I know you've already put it in there, or I think I did. If you could throw that again now, and also just a link to the Arcata website in general.
Will do.
Cool. Claire, I see that you've got your hand up. I'm going to ask one more question from the queue, and then pass it over to you. So this question, I think, is an important one from Will in Berlin. How might relationalized finance address redistribution slash reparations for centuries of imperialist, colonial, capitalist, patriarchal violence and extraction? Does expropriation and socialization fit within this context? So, David and Natasha, over to you.
That's a big topic. I think in terms of the cultural change that has to happen, that sort of reconciliation and reconstituting of our collective selves has to happen. I can't quite conceive of an operational vehicle for that right now. I'm not an expert on some of the reparations innovations that have been thought about, but to the extent that national identity and cultures itself and the territorialization of that is being reconstituted through ecological change, through geopolitical change, this is a ripe topic because it's part of the whole global north-south realignment that has to occur. So that's all I can say. But Natasha.
Well, I know that in the US context, of course, and Susan has also done some work on that, is how community land trusts can be used for reparations. So I know there's quite a lot of, like the different community land trusts, black community land trusts. I forgot the name now. Bill, you know probably the community land trust that focuses on reparations for BIPOC. I think
I know what you're
Land.
talking about, and the
Yeah.
name escapes me as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
So I think there is definitely using these transvestment vehicles or commons vehicles for reparations is definitely a good way to insulate and decommodify land, but also to insulate it from the capitalist economy that we live in as well in the future.
Make sure that it has a collectivist impact as opposed to just a $2,000 check to someone.
Yeah.
Right. When I'll voice just a very brief example from, again, the bioregion that I live in, the Northeast Woodlands. The example of First Light and the Wabanaki Commission. These are two separate entities. The Wabanaki Commission is a commission of the Wabanaki people in Maine and Nova Scotia and the Maritimes of Canada. And First Light is a settler or white organization that came to the Wabanaki peoples and asked, how can we help with land back initiatives? And the Wabanaki people said, well, we'll give time to this when you have raised enough money to actually do this. And so First Light focused on doing that, and they now have a long track record of doing significant, in the millions of dollars of land back. So that's just one example of a collaboration between an indigenous community and a settler community to make that happen. We're in conversation with First Light about having them speak along with the Wabanaki Commission in either one of our open dialogues or in our conference. So you'll hear more on that in the future, I'm hoping.
And I know that Janelle Ossie does a lot of work as well on land back reparations as well. Yeah.
Cool. I'm sorry, I didn't hear who it was.
Janelle Ossie who started the Sustainable Economy Law Center in sorry.
Oakland.
Where is it again? David?
In Oakland.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. And just to give a cap on this before handing it over to Claire, Natasha and David, is it safe to go to, like, say, quarter after? Are you both able to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
We'll end things, or at least transition over to my wind down at that point. Claire, over to you, and then I see Steve has his hand up. So let's end it with Steve's question. So Claire, you first, and then Steve.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. This is really helpful to have this conversation. And yeah, I wanted to point to and then just ask what we're doing in Regenerate Cascadia, recognizing that that people actually haven't been coming together at a landscape scale to pull the projects that are happening together. So there's a level of coordination and cooperation that uh, we weren't seeing happening at a bioregional using bioregional thinking. And yeah, just sort of really wanting to um, I know you were trying to talk about projects that were happening, but I feel like the conversation isn't, we're not connecting the dots. Like Regenerate Cascadia is trying to do this work where we've got 10 different landscapes learning from each other, because it's actually in the very basic, how do we cooperate together? If we can't do that, we actually can't hold any of the other programs together in a coordinated fashion. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, just sort of, I guess the question is, how do we find each other, lift each other up, reference each other, give, I know you were doing that in your essay, but I feel like there's a lot more that needs to happen
Yeah.
globally, so that we're learning from each other. Because I will just end on this just to say the richness that we're finding in this pilot of these different landscapes as they share their stories, of the actual work that they're doing, that is so rich and that needs to be shared because there's a templating of how that can happen that can accelerate the work.
Yeah, definitely. And I would really invite anyone who has great examples of, um, yeah, what they see as relationalized finance or transvestment or bioregional projects that need support. I would really invite you to send them to us. Our email address is at the end of the essay, and we're actually inviting people to send us examples. We really would like to see more examples of this. Is that right, David?
I think, yeah, I agree. I think there's a whole lot of co-learning we need to do trans-regionally, and I don't think we have a vehicle for that yet. I would love to see some major, uh, convening of the many vanguard players in the bioregional world. I know there are some early efforts to explore that, including one that Bill is involved in, but uh, I think that we don't talk horizontally enough. I would love to learn more from what you've been doing, Claire, in Cascadia, and how to export that out. What are the vehicle means of communication? I think the other thing that we need to pay attention to is arts and culture as a medium for doing that, which is popular and not too eggheady or arcane or academic, that can get to people's guts. I know Pete Seeger used to have the Clearwater Festival on the Hudson, which was a fantastic, fun family event, which is also educational and an on-ramp to a lot of these topics. So I think we need to do some inventing of public events, culture, and ways of communicating it.
Yeah, and I would just add that in the Netherlands, I think we are working towards that also within 8 landscapes, but also the Bioregional Weaving Labs is in Europe, I think is doing, I mean, I'm also part of it, and I think that they're doing great work, and I think that's, like Claire said, that's where the important work is to weave a lot of the different initiatives and landscapes and interregional learning together. And I'm very happy with the work that Noah and Karen have been doing for the last few years on this as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure many people on this call were on the call yesterday with the Bioregional Weaving Labs, the Bioregional Hope. And I know that the Bioregional Weaving Lab is going through some transitions right now that are opening it up to do more of, augment the weaving that it's been doing on a continental scale and do more engagement at the global scale. And they are actually a member. Bioregional Weaving Lab is a member, along with I believe Schumacher, as of very recently, of the Bioregional Coherence Circle that we at R3.0 started last year in relation to our conference, but continued it beyond the conference to play, at least a preliminary role in this global weaving cross bioregionally. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But Steve, why don't we take your question or comment?
I don't want to forget to say all of the work that Joe Brewer has done with the design school as well. We have to mention that as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Natasha. I see a ton of design school folks here on the line, so I think that is met with welcome ears hearing that. And in fact, Steve, I first encountered Steve in his series of presentations in the design school. So Steve, over to you for a last comment. Michael, we'll probably have to hold on your hand or just check in later. But Steve, over to you.
Yeah, first of all, just huge gratitude to Natasha and David for this brilliant paper, and Bill, to you and R3.0 for organizing what I think is a really important seed conversation. I put the reasons why I think the paper is brilliant, just 3 of them, in the chat, but I think it's naming a pattern. I think it's that can be applied not just to finance. You're bringing an adjective of relationalized that can be applied to governance, can be applied to education, food, and in my particular case, technology. I also love that you're bringing this sort of principled way of interacting with the current systems without getting captured by them. That interface is just critical, and you name it. And I love transvestment, but it's, as some in the chat have said, it's broader than just the financial interactions, right? And thirdly, it's landing at the right moment. I mean, we're seeing the accelerants of collapse play out on the global stage. We're seeing, greater collapse awareness. And so the timing is just right. My question is, how can we bring this into embodied practice, relationalized finance into embodied practice as quickly as possible? And so my orientation to that is thinking through, well, what are the dependencies? What would need to be present in order for this to move from theory into practice? And among those is, I don't see, I see technology as an amplifier. I don't see relationalized finance being possible if it is dependent upon the technologies of extraction, which is what we have today. So we need relationalized technology. Your paper inspired me to write a paper on what might relationalized technology look like. So I'll be sharing that with you. I'd love your feedback.
Great.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, Natasha, unless you have some suggestion for Steve, I mean, I think finding the critical mass of support to innovate as a insurgent alternative is the first threshold. And I think of the African women diaspora has often created their own informal finance groups for themselves, to the consternation of conventional banking and the nation state. And I think that small acts of pooling money and then showing you've got the juice to do something starts to attract others, and you get a flow going. Now, that I don't mean to sound simple-minded about it, but I think that's where we do start at ground zero, unless there's some folks with sufficient institutional stature or money to try to make a bigger infrastructure beginning. But I mean, these are some of the issues we have to sort through. So I thank you for raising that, Steve, and for indeed transposing it to tech world, because I think that's especially as tech becomes so consolidated in Silicon Valley, we need to find a way to revive appropriate technology and convivial technology.
Yeah. And I would also just add that, of course, it's quite obvious, but I think we also need to start realizing that there is no lack of money. there is actually too much money, and but it's just not in the right place. And so yeah, we have to have also this abundance mindset. I think I worked for a philanthropic fund for a few years, and that really helped me to think about, where that there is so much money. So we need to start. It's also our own cultural shift in that. I know it's not very. It's easy to say when you don't. It's hard to think that way when you don't have enough money to pay your rent. But still, there is so much money. It's just not where it should be. So I think that's what we're also trying to achieve.
Mm. Natasha, David, thank you so much for sharing your thinking on relationalized finance in the bioregional context with us here on the first R3.0 open dialogue of the year. If you're able to stay on, I'm going to say a few things in closing, but anybody who does need to drop off, totally understood. We're over the hour and a half mark, nearing 2 hours at this point. So thanks to everyone, in addition to David and Natasha, for joining us today and making this a super robust dialogue. I think it really delivered on the open dialogue side of things, although there are some questions and things that didn't get responded to. So, David and Natasha, I'll be sharing that with you in case you want to dive into this with anyone. So thanks to all. I'm going to bring up my screen and just share a few closing items about, in particular, places that we can go from here. So, okay, great. I think it's loading. Okay. So I just wanted to mention we do have a landing page for the open dialogues on bioregioning on our website. So that is something that you can find pretty readily on the website under the bioregioning tab and the convening tab. And we'll share this entire deck, so both my slides and David and Natasha's slides afterwards, on that landing page. So that's where you can find out information about all of these. And also, thanks to Sam Power, we're now including a downloadable calendar link. She'd asked for that last year. We did a lot of work seeing how that would intersect with our web page, and we just decided to go with an off-site version of calendaring. The other thing that we have is a series of bioregional carrying capacity sessions from last year and the year before. We're not going to formally continue that series. We'll be integrating that into the open dialogues going forward. So right now, I don't have it firmed up, but next month we're looking at having our open dialogue be around bioregional carrying capacities, with Guy Harrington, who wrote the study comparing the projections of the 1972 Limits to Growth report with the actual data from 2022, I believe, so at the 50-year anniversary, and found that the projections were very on target, unfortunately, I suppose. So, and Gaia is diving deeper into bioregionalism. So I will share information on that when we get a confirmation on that, but that's looking like it'll be the next session. I also wanted to mention about the R3.0 conference in 2026. So that's an annual conference we've been doing for 13 or 14 years at this point. It's going to be happening on September 8th through 10th online. And the theme that we just announced is bioregional regeneration as collapse resilience. So that sort of combines our bioregional focus that we just introduced last year with the collapse resilience, which was the focus of our conference the year before, and also, aligns with what others in the field are doing, in particular, Joe and Penny and the whole design school focusing their learning journey this year on bioregionalism through collapse. And the tagline is Earth-centric biocultural kinship, knowledge, and governance. And that speaks to the three sort of pillars of ours at R3.0, kinship being sort of the relationalized, relational element of and gathering, convening knowledge, referring to our bioregional knowledge commons work, and governance to our bioregional governance work. So those are the three sessions that we'll have. We're also going to trim down the content because we are running these in parallel with in-person confluences. So I'll share a little bit about that in a moment, but just while still on the conference, we're looking to have one panel session per day on those 3 days, and then have the rest of the engagement be engagement with bioregional confluences on the ground, meeting in person, so that it becomes much more of what we did on the sort of the third and subsequent weekdays after our conference last time. We're actually going to integrate that confluence engagement into the conference itself. So that's about the conference. On confluencing, we have a coherent confluencing community at this point, with I think there were about 50 or more bioregional groups that registered for confluences for last year's conference. Some of them didn't end up making it, but they are still in the confluencing community, and we're having monthly confluencing community calls, focusing in particular on bridging amongst the cross bioregionally. And so tomorrow we're having a confluencing community call that's going to feature the Great Lakes bioregion in Kenya with Millicent Olal Machalwa, who I think was on the call, and her daughter Mickey, talking about their work in the Great Lakes bioregion, and particularly Lake Victoria, and the collaboration that they've been doing with Marcus Petz and I believe Muhammad Ali from the Ural Mountains and West Eurasian Taiga Forest bioregion in Finland. So they've been collaborating together already, and tomorrow you can hear more about what they'll about that collaboration. Reach out to me for information on that. It's not something that we've been announcing publicly, but we're announcing it to the confluencing community itself. We'll be opening registration for confluences for the 2026 running by February. We're looking to finish out our conference website by the end of January, and then be able to open that registration in early February. The last thing is that we are pulling together a confluencing fund. So last year we used some of our funding from the Lankley Chase Foundation for a 21,000 euro confluencing fund, and we don't have that anymore. So we are fundraising right now to support the confluences to do this convening. So our goal, as you can see, is $50,000, which is more than double the amount last year. So we're hoping to both, up the amount per confluence that we can share, and be able to support even more confluences. So please, this deck and elsewhere, we'll share the link for that confluencing fund. We've been getting donations of $50, $100, $250 coming in already since we announced this late last year. So I think that covers it for the sort of closing information that I wanted to share. I also wanted to share that my colleague Ralph Thurm wasn't able to be here, but I did get a text from him post-surgery, and everything went well according to what he said. Again, it was just a standard procedure, nothing to be too concerned about. But Ralph is usually here side by side with me, and today he wasn't able to, but I do want to say thank you to everyone for me and Ralph and for R3.0. Again, I'll end with saying thank you to Natasha and David and the Schumacher Center, and thanks to everyone who joined. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you. And I'm gonna stop the recording.